Todas las personas pueden escribir, pueden hacer cualquier cosa, se tienen que emancipar.
Ningún libro verdadero tiene ni una primera ni una última página.
Con el significado del que se recoge a sí mismo.
I'm back, I'm writing short stories now, and but nothing set in the pandemic.
Cada vez que al poema se le imponía la palabra yo, sentía como si de golpe se hubiera metido en la camisa de otra persona.
Antes soñaba sapos con lentejuelas. Ese es el sueño más lindo que tuve.
Le dedicó la semana entera a quejarse y suspirar, pero el sábado a la noche me dijo: mañana quédate que tengo un plan.
Dice palabras que te ayudan a sobrevivir.
Ahí lo llevo.
Muchas gracias. Nos vemos pronto. Gracias.
Hola a todas y a todos, muy bienvenidos a esta primera persona junto a David Abram y a Soledad Barruti. Estamos muy contentos de que David Abram participe en la edición de este año del festival. Agradecemos especialmente a la Embajada de Estados Unidos por ayudarnos a que David Abram esté hoy acá. David Abram es un ecologista cultural, es filósofo, dicta conferencias por todo el mundo. Su libro anterior a Devenir Animal, que es el que hace poquito publicó la editorial Sigilo en nuestro país. El libro anterior es La magia de los sentidos y se convirtió en un clásico de la literatura ambiental. El trabajo de Abram ayudó a catalizar el surgimiento de varias disciplinas nuevas, incluido el floreciente campo de la ecopsicología. Sus escritos sobre las causas y las consecuencias de la crisis climática han sido publicadas en numerosas revistas y antologías. Su quehacer filosófico se ha nutrido de la tradición filosófica de la fenomenología de Merleau-Ponty, pero también de su trabajo de campo junto a los indígenas del sureste de Asia y de las Américas. Es fundador y director creativo de la Alianza por la Ética Salvaje. Y David Abram vive actualmente junto a sus dos hijos en las faldas de las montañas rocosas del sur. Él va a estar conversando, como dijimos, con Soledad Barruti. Ella es argentina, es periodista, es escritora y trabaja en temas vinculados a la alimentación y a la industria alimentaria en programas de radio y en televisión y en distintos medios gráficos de acá y de otras partes del mundo, como por ejemplo The New York Times, la revista Gato Pardo, la revista Mu. Sobre esa temática también brinda charlas en universidades nacionales e internacionales y ciclos en todo el país y en el exterior. Su primer libro de no ficción, Mal comidos, cómo la industria alimentaria argentina nos está matando, fue editado por la editorial Planeta en 2013 y se convirtió inmediatamente en un bestseller. Lleva más de 30 ediciones y hoy continúa siendo fervorosamente leído. Su segundo título, Mala leche, el supermercado como emboscada, fue publicado en diciembre de 2018 también por la misma editorial, por Planeta, y ya tiene 15 ediciones en Argentina, en Chile, en Uruguay, en Colombia, en México y en Perú. Es directora de Bocado, que es una red de periodismo latinoamericano sobre alimentación y territorios. En 2021 obtuvo una beca del Pulitzer Center. Así que bueno, les damos la bienvenida a Soledad Barruti, a David Abram. Como verán, tienen muchas cosas en común y muchas cosas seguramente para conversar. Muchísimas gracias, los esperamos mañana, viernes, sábado y domingo en el Centro Cultural Recoleta, desde la tarde hasta la noche. Tenemos muchísimas actividades para todos. Muchísimas gracias.
Well, David, hello.
Hello.
It's a great pleasure to be interviewing you today. Well, your work is awesome. I love your writings. And I find them like an invitation to deconstruct us as humans in a very radical way. By reading you, we start feeling the reciprocity between our senses, our perception, and the rest of the sentient world. And I find it awesome that writing and reading can still do that. And I would like to start asking you about this change between forgetting we are animals and becoming animals again, and about our bodies having the opportunity to express and communicate with the rest of the living world again. Do you feel this is the purpose of your work? This is our moment of awareness?
Oh, yeah. Well, surely in all of my work, I am trying to wake up our animal senses, to open in a fresh way our eyes, our ears, our skin, to unlock the shackles that we have placed upon our senses as a result of often very outmoded ways of speaking, and hence outmoded ways of thinking. Can we find fresh ways of thinking with our whole body, not just thinking with our minds? Can we learn to reflect and even to speak as full-bodied animals and not as disembodied minds that are just imprisoned within our heads or floating somewhere above the atmosphere, looking at the earth as if from outside, because we are not outside. So certainly in all my work, I am struggling to spark, to catalyze, to open a fresh solidarity and affinity and reciprocity between the human animal and the animate earth, or between our body and the flesh of this breathing planet in which we walk and live and sleep.
You are always telling that our bodies are not capsules, are just like the extension of biggest body, that it could be called like the body of the earth. And we are so used to binaries that we talk about bodies and we don't introduce emotions, and in which ways our bodies are an extension of our emotions, and our emotions participates in our animal being outside there.
I think emotions, or I perhaps prefer the simpler word feelings, but the body is a creature of feeling. The human animal feels everything. One could even say that thinking is a kind of feeling. It's a style of feeling. But it's not just our organism that feels the world. Every creature, every animal, every plant is a kind of body of feeling. Everything feels. For me, even the ground underfoot, the mountain, the river. So feelings are what we are made of. Yeah.
But do you feel like, do you think that the ground feels sorrow or happiness or tenderness or whatever?
I don't know. Of course, I don't know. But if I feel sorrow or tenderness, because I am myself an expression of the place where I dwell, that it seems very possible to me that the sensations, that the feelings that rise and move through me are not entirely mine, that they are perhaps originate in the wider landscape that surrounds me, or perhaps even in the ground and below the ground. I'm quite sure that that the ground or a large rock on the ground does not feel the same sensations, the same emotions, does not experience them in the same way that I do. But I don't think that that a wolf or a coyote or a moose experiences these feelings in anything quite like the way we humans do. Each being experiences the world so differently through its own set of senses, through its own flesh.
But when we are open to that reciprocity, I remember the part where you write about feeling the ground, feeling us. When you are open to that reciprocity, a lot of new feelings come into our bodies that are not for sure ours, but on that mixture.
In that mixture, as you say, they are born in the meeting or the encounter between our animal organism and the animate earth around us, in the meeting between our senses and the earthly sensuous. So many of these properties or qualities that we think are just ours, and we pride ourselves that we humans have these capacities that nothing else has. But this is a kind of foolishness and arrogance, because almost all of our experiences are born between us and what we encounter steadily as we move through the world. So are these experiences strictly ours, or do they not belong just as much to the land as well?
And well, let's enter into the mind subject, where we as humans believe that our intelligence is ours, and you in your book talk about the mind as a creation of the planet Earth, as an extension of creativity and of that insondable big living, breathing system.
Yes. Well, first, before going straight there, I think it's important to mention briefly, at least my sense that although we say that we live on the earth, that here on earth this is happening or that is happening, or we were placed on earth for this purpose or for that purpose, or on the face of the earth these things are unfolding today. We speak of living on earth all the time, but I think that this is a confusion and a bit of a problem, because I'm quite sure that we don't live on the earth. Sometimes when I'm teaching, I take my students out under the sky, and we look up at the clouds that are sort of just lazing in the blue sky overhead, like they are today outside my window here in northern New Mexico, and I point out to my students or to the others who've accompanied me that we know that the earth is spinning very rapidly around its axis, spinning toward the east at 1,500 miles per hour at the equator. Here at this latitude, maybe closer to 1,000 miles now. Very fast, really fast. That the earth is spinning toward the east. So as we're looking up at those clouds, shouldn't we see those clouds whipping off toward the west? But they're not. They're not speeding off toward the west at all. In fact, today they're just kind of lazily drifting toward the south, very slowly. And why is that, I ask? to which some perspicacious student will pipe up and say, well, it's because the clouds are accompanying the earth as it turns, which of course is true, because the clouds are held to the earth by this vast depth, this ocean of air or atmosphere that extends, in fact, many, many, many miles above those clouds. So when we are looking up at those clouds, we are looking up at the earth. That's earth up there, which is to say we don't live on the earth, we live in the earth. We live immersed in earth, immersed in this ocean of air as thoroughly as fish are immersed in the sea. We live down here in the depths of this breathing planet. And for me, this is quite important that we begin to recognize in a fresh way this the atmosphere around us, which we have taken for many centuries just to be sort of empty space. We don't speak of the air between myself and another person. We just speak of the space between us. Or we don't speak of the air between me and a nearby tree. It's just empty space, the space between us. So it's just, it's like a void, an emptiness, a void. And so it's a perfect place to toss everything we want to avoid, all of the toxic effluence of our industries and such. We put them in the invisible atmosphere, and whatever dissipates as smoke emerging from the exhaust pipes of our automobiles and our airplanes and our ships, and we think it dissipates. It goes out of sight, so now it's out of mind. But to our indigenous ancestors and to the oral and indigenous peoples among us, that which dissolves into the unseen air or atmosphere is by that very gesture entering into the mind, the wind mind of the world. That the air or the atmosphere of this planet has a great deal in common with what we speak of as the mind, which we know is something quite mysterious. It's ineffable. It's invisible. It's impossible for us to fully grasp it, or even to get outside of it in order to look at it and speak about it objectively, because wherever we step, mind is already there. It's a lot like the wind or the breath or the air of this planet. Wherever we step, we are enveloped by it. We can't get outside of it, apart from it. And in fact, the words for psyche or for spirit or for mind in any language, if you trace those words back to their oral origins, we'll always find at least one of these words that names the air or the wind or the breath as the very body of that mystery we call mind. So for me, it's really, really helpful to begin to notice that mind, which we think of and speak of in such complicated ways, as though I have a little mind inside me and you have a little mind inside you, and then we can argue about whether that squirrel on the ground has a little mind inside its head. But perhaps we don't need to be so complicated. Perhaps we can allow that there is something interior about the mind, but it's not because it is inside us, but because we are bodily inside it. along with all the other animals and the plants and the drifting clouds, because we live inside a mind that is not ours, but is Earth's.
It's beautiful. It recovers the idea of the Earth as a mother as well, that it's very indigenous and very common in between different cultures in different territories. They all recover this idea of an intelligent mother giving us life to all the beings in the earth, right?
Yes, but I would pick up there and just say that every indigenous, traditionally oral culture we know of, and these are so different. These cultures contrast with one another so much. They are often, it's hard to imagine that they can inhabit the same planet or even the same solar system, because their worldviews, their cosmologies are so richly divergent from one another, and yet they share a few commonalities. And one of them would be the sense that everything is alive. Another would be the sense that everything speaks, that all things have the power of meaningful expression or speech, but also this sense that the air or the breath or the wind is a kind of deeply sacred mystery that grants us the ability to think and to feel and to sense. So they all, in various different ways, give expression to this sense that mind or psyche or the soul is not something in us, but something we are inside of, along with all the other animals and the plants and the mountains and the rivers. That mind is not ours, but it's the world's, it's Earth's.
I love that you brought the word sacred, because I would like to ask you about that. Like, far from the religion point of view, at least like the recent forms of religion, do you think that amplifying our perception can somehow bring us back to this sacredness of the world and of living in general, of being alive in in this world?
Of course. Of course. It's quite clear and palpably evident to me anyway, and perhaps to you too, Soledad, that a new shape and texture of the sacred is trying to be born today through our work and through the work of many persons arrayed around the sphere. Each of us working different edges of this mystery, but a new shape of the sacred is coming into existence, and it is a sense of the holy or the sacred that is profoundly immanent. It's no longer a sense that the sacred is something that transcends the physical world, that exists outside the material plane of existence, and that we need, in order to access or gain or experience that sense of the sacred, we need to, as it were, leave our bodies and move into an ephemeral, disembodied style of experience that drifts above, far beyond the world, rather than this kind of transcendence, that there is a deeply immanent, richly immanent, very mysteriously present quality of sacredness that is beginning to leak out of every blossom on every branch, every leaf, every blade of grass, every clump of dirt in the ground, that the sacred is turning up now everywhere, and is not contrary to the material world. It seems to be inherent and integral to matter itself, as if matter is, in English, our word matter is clearly linked to mater, mother, but both of these derive from the word matrix, a word that originally means the womb. And there is a sense in which matter is not contrary to spirit, but rather matter is the womb of all things, that it's this living medium out of which things are born and into which things continually return. So the distinction and separation between matter and spirit, I think, is falling apart. The two are blending and merging deeply into one another. So it turns out that even a stone, a rock, a boulder that you meet, sometimes covered with crinkly red and black lichens, as you are walking through the land near your home, that this is itself a deep mystery, a power and a presence that exudes sentience, but in a very different shape from my own sentience, a very different style of vitality or dynamism.
Vitality and a lot of love as well. I mean, when I read you, what comes all the time is a deeply loving sensation, loving feeling for all what surrounds us when we walk and when we start seeing again and mixing with all. And it's beautiful because you don't do that in a way where we romanticize nature. On the contrary, you give back like this in this symmetric encounter, like the ferocity and intensity of being alive. Yes. And in a way, you put something that is kind of dangerous in this way of reconnecting with nature, that is death, that we are mortals again, that we are in this symmetric relationship, we can be eaten by an animal, not just eat an animal, but be eaten.
Yes, indeed, that we are not just eating, but we are all mutually edible.
Yeah.
And, but linking to what you were just asking me about the sacred, perhaps a sense of eating itself as a sacrament, not just something one experiences in the Christian Mass, eating the sacrament, but that any taking of the flesh of a plant into my mouth, I am eating the body of another style of experience, taking the flesh of another animal into my mouth and chewing it, swallowing it, and bringing it into my body. That this too is a profound sacrament, as we ourselves will be perhaps eaten by the world, or at least composted richly back into fresh and vibrant soil, fertile soil. So it's a sense of being entangled with all these other styles of life. But you're right, it's both a dynamic and vibrant world of experience, but it's not particularly nice. It is shot through with shadow, with difficulty, with predation, with loss, illness, death as well. But of course, that's what makes it so beautiful. Without the shadow and without these grief tones, the world might be pretty, but it wouldn't be beautiful. Beauty comes when there is this rich layer or lattice of shade and shadow that is laced through the bright wonder of the world. It's difficult being alive, and it's difficult being alive inside a world that is itself alive, where each thing lives by eating other things. And so, yes, there is a sense of difficulty and also danger and risk all the time in waking up our senses or waking up our bodily sensibilities. One becomes much more aware that we live in a very precarious existence, that there is risk everywhere, something we've all been reminded of recently by the pandemic that, broke like a tsunami across all of our cultures over the last several years. But much more insistently, we are learning of this as forest fires rage. There are several near my home now, the igniting forests that I love and have walked and wandered within for so many years are now going up in flames. Meanwhile, hurricane winds of a force that's never before been seen are charging across the land, and floods, flooding also again and again each year. So we are reminded and brought back to our bodily animal presence in the world by these events that return us from just being sort of minds floating in our skulls to a sense of rich, wakeful awareness, all our senses awake, because when there is a bit of risk or a lot of danger, our animal senses wake up in a very potent and powerful way, and we start responding to all sorts of nuances and shifts in the immediate locale around us. Reading the land, not just with our conscious mind, but with our body, just sussing out what's happening according to all subtle cues in the landscape around us that we can't consciously track all the time, but our animal body is tracking it steadily.
And giving back to our animal body and mind all that intensity in a way also help us with our relationship in between humans, right? Not just with nature and in that new peace agreement that we need to make with what's around us, but in between us, that it's also very closed in a way. We are not relating in a very nice way in between each other.
Yes, our human and interhuman relations seem to have become very brittle.
Yeah.
And our international relations very brittle. Even our interactions within our families are sometimes quite coarse and fragmenting, often broken. So many relationships, so many deep partnerships and marriages bursting apart. I would say one way of making the link there is to point out that that for so many of our indigenous ancestral cultures, for so long, for really 99% of our human tenure within this breathing biosphere, we lived in a deeply animistic relation to the animate earth around us. That is, we lived as hunters and foragers in cultures that assumed, for all sorts of good reasons, that everything was alive, everything was awake and aware, although most things were awake in ways very different from our style of wakefulness. And most things were experiencing the world very different from the way we experience the world. And yet each thing was a body of sensation and experience. When to live in such a world is to be negotiating relationships with all things, with mountains and rivers and river otters and frogs and eagle and raven and hummingbird and aspen groves and pinyon pine trees and huge forests themselves were felt to be intelligent presences. And one had to always be practicing regularly relationship with every aspect of the sensuous surroundings. Now, today, and just, for the last few hundred years, we all find ourselves suddenly born into a culture or a civilization that defines all of these other shapes of life and sensibility as objects, basically inert, basically inanimate, or perhaps just mechanical beings that are following determinate mechanical actions, not the kind of thing that you can have a relationship with. Because if something is entirely inanimate or is just a mechanical object, there's no way to have an open, ongoing rapport and relation, or to slip into a kind of conversation without words with this other being, an improvisational duet between your body and this other being. We can't relate to things when things are defined entirely objectively as being a set or clutch of inert or inanimate or mechanically determinate objects. And so we have fallen out of relation with the land, out of relation with the mountains and rivers, with the other animals, the plants. The only place we can turn for real relation is toward another person. And yet our animal body still remembers, still knows that it needs the nourishment that it used to get from all these other relationships, the nourishment of being in an active rapport with the moon, or calling the sun up from the ground at dawn, and making gestures to the wind, and listening for its reply, practices of propitiation and praising the other animals and leaving out offerings for them, and even apprenticing oneself to the animals you were hunting, learning their ways, tracking their tracks through the forest, giving oneself so deeply to the more than human collective of life. Our animal body still craves all of that many-faceted nourishment we got from being in active relation with all these shapes of otherness. And yet we think today, oh, I crave being met. I long to be met by an other. But we think the only place we can find this otherness is another person, another nervous system shaped just like ourselves. But to load in all of that craving into just someone who is so similar to ourselves, another being of our own species, to load into our human relationships that need to be met in such a full-rounded, full-bodied way by spiders and humpback whales, to think we can find all of that just in relation with other people and with another person. It's crazy. And it loads so much pressure on our human relationships and renders them all very brittle, very breakable, prone to fragmenting and breaking at every turn. and we turn toward our husbands, our wives, our partners, and we say, I really love you, darling. I really do, but I'm just not feeling met. It's just not working. Can we change something? And of course, we can't fully change out of our human form. So it blows apart marriage after marriage, relationship after relationship. Because the only thing that can really satisfy this ancestral craving that is still so present with us is a full-on relation with everything. And so that's what my work is also about, is one could say is, you used the term love before, but because it's such a bodily love, I sometimes would prefer to speak of it as an erotic bodily love, that my work is trying to open an erotic relation with everything, with the ground underfoot, with the wind gusting past, with the waters, the streams moving near your house, but even the water streaming out of the faucet in your kitchen sink. Each thing has and is beckoning to us, is calling us into relation, and we need to open eros, or the erotic, out of this strictly sexual relation that we sort of have locked it into, where we feel that eros can only move among us, among people, when it can really move between us and the mountain, between us and the crescent moon, between my body and the body of the ocean with its waves rolling toward me. And each of these calls for a different relation from me. So if we could begin to open an erotic relation to everything around us, to the whole body of the sensuous, this would, I think, both ease and fluidify, render much more flexible the relations that we sustain with one another, in our partnerships, in our families, in our community, friendships and enmities, and in even the international relations carried on between cultures and between nations that are so fraught right now, these relationships. Does that make sense? Do you follow?
Yeah, really a lot. And it comes with the next question, that it's related with childhood. In your book, you write about your daughter and that spontaneous affinity of children in general with what surrounds them. And you were talking about this, like re-indigenize in some way our relationship with the earth, and we can also like have this invitation of children that are animistic in all forms, and and I would like you to tell us about that, about the relationship with that children have, like innate with all what surrounds them, how we cut that off, and how can we like
well, I think it's probably obvious to everyone watching or listening in that that children quite spontaneously animate the things around them, that they feel the animation that is already there in a stone, in a tree. My daughter, when she was very small, had this very active relation with various trees around our home, with an apple tree that she just related to it, spoke to it, felt it very much as another being, just as present in the world and creatively present as she. was. And then as she got a little bit older, still in mid-childhood, she began to notice that the tree was weirdly different from her. That is, it couldn't move and walk and, pick up its roots and walk somewhere else, that it was sort of set and rooted in one place. And so she began to, I noticed in her conversations with the tree, try and make some space for this difference between them. And she would ask the tree, what does it think about certain things? Because she was interested in how a being who stays in one spot looks at and ponders the very same phenomena that she was pondering from her ambulatory, moving presence. Its perspective was different from hers. I think if this style of participation with things is not cut off, usually around the age of 7, if it hasn't already happened before, because, well, it's happening now in ever so many ways because kids are being brought up now online. So many children are growing up with their digital screen-fitted gizmos that their parents hand them very early on, because it gives the parents some sort of a break from the ongoing, engagement and exhausting engagement with your kid. Well, what a terrible mistake that is, because these screen-fitted gadgets and computers and iPads and they don't have anything of that earthborn otherness that a tree has, that even a boulder or a stone has, each one so unique. But these factory-produced objects made and then programmed by the human mind begin to close children's nervous systems all too rapidly, all too quickly, into a kind of closed loop or circuit with the extended, exclusively human nervous system. That is, we enter into a closed loop with these screens that short circuits that old instinctive reciprocity between our eyes and all the visible presences around us, between our ears and all the other speaking voices around us. We need to allow our children the chance to be richly oral and animistic in their play with the living world. If we don't interrupt this in the ways that we have also just by modern schooling, where we're also teaching children their ABCs in very rigid ways at the same time for every child. Some kids can learn to read and write really young, and it does them no harm. But for other kids, it needs to stretch on much later because they're carrying on these imaginative, storied relations with all these other presences in their world. If this animistic, as you call it, sensibility is allowed to grow and mature right into adolescence and through adolescence into adulthood, then, at each stage, my daughter's experience of that tree, of that apple tree, emerged into a deeper awareness of the difference of that tree from her. And then as she learned more that somehow the tree's leaves were drinking sunlight, eating the sunlight and transmuting it into sugars, into flesh, into the body of that tree, while its roots were slurping up water ground underfoot, even as its leaves are drinking the sunlight. She began to realize how different, how other this tree was. so that by the time my daughter was 14, 15, she could look at a mountain and really feel into this very different way of being that is a mountain. So children are amazing creatures for sure, but they don't have yet the rich sense of differentiation and multiplicity, the radically different forms of otherness and other sensibilities that we as adults can hold and carry. And so it's not like the magic lives and is encapsulated there in childhood. Its seeds are there in childhood, but the magic is distributed throughout every age. And of course, as adults, we can really practice and negotiate relations with things wildly different from ourselves. If we are whole people who've not been broken and bent massively out of shape by this goofy civilization.
So difficult. I mean, I have a daughter, a 4-year-old daughter, and it's like so difficult to not enter these cultural devices that cut off all her engagement with everything. Yes. And I was reading the other day, for sure you know him, Ailton Krenak, that's an indigenous leader from Brazil and a philosopher, and he wrote something like that the educational system is a factory of madness. No, it's the way where we are reproducing all the time what we need to cut off. It's not that spirit, but the other, the spirit that we that brought us here.
Yes, it's as if schools, a bit like factories, schools, also jails and prisons, also animal laboratories, also zoos, many psychiatric hospitals. These are all places where what's wild in us is being tamed and made safe, domesticated, made safe for commodity and consumer culture. And schools, unfortunately, have come to play much the same role. So can we take our kids out of doors over and over again into the breathing, heaving world of shape and texture and color and form, and just let them play? And we play with them. And there are so many different forms that play can take, but that is the essence of real learning and real education, is play in the many-shaped weirdness of the world with the many different beings in the world. So yeah, it's a big problem and a big sadness when we are linking our children to all these gadgets and technologies, because these technologies are very abstract. To make sense of them, to even just engage with them at all, one has to open up various abstract parts of our own nervous system that were never meant to come into play at 4 years of age or 8 years of age or even 12 years of age. These are things that only came into our cultural world very recently, in the last 100 years. And they take a lot of, one has to be deeply grounded in the soil of the land, in the soil of story and rich imagination, before one can then understand how to dance well with these very highfalutin and abstract gadgets and gizmos, all the digital flotsam and jetsam of our lives.
And childhood is an opportunity for us as well, as adults, to see these connections again and feel them. And in playing with them, we can assume different ways of talking with what surrounds us.
Yes.
And that's beautiful. That's as an opportunity that we never talk about as societies, what children really have there to learn us all the time by being.
Yes. I mean, if you think about it, a computer screen, it's so dazzling. It captures much of what the fire in a fire pit used to hold for our species. Just that it's glowing, and the glow of the flames keeps shifting in the way the flames move. So the glow of the digital screen calls and captures our eyes, and things keep moving on its surface for a child, and voices emerge from it, and things speak. This is something that snags and grabs our animistic sensibility so powerfully. But of course, the way voices and beings, or animated films of other animals or space aliens are so bright with their colors and their ways of speaking, which are even speaking in words. It's so much more intense and powerful than the spider weaving its web in the corner of the room, that a child, the spider has no chance in comparison to the dazzle of the digital screen. And so the child never discovers, as human children always did, for tens of thousands of years, the dance of a spider spinning the whole universe out of its abdomen, and weaving a galaxy in front of our eyes. This takes subtlety and a subtle attention that all of us need to exercise and return to again and again. If we have opened that capacity with spiders and patches of lichen on rocks and mistletoe growing on trees, and other trees with big bodacious leaves, and yet some dead trees that are still standing with their snags upright, even as they're affording new homes for squirrels and owls in the upper branches. Once we have given ourselves and been taught by, apprenticed our bodies to that world in its multiform strangeness and weirdness for several years, actually for the depth of one's childhood, then to come into interaction with a computer screen, we know how to use it and how to work with it, that it has to always be placed in service to the more than human world, that our engagement with our technologies is really something that must be placed in service, not just to our own selves and our own entertainment, but in service to the whole more than human multiplicity of life, and to the earth itself. But right now, what all these technologies are doing is serving to snag and capture our senses and cut our nervous system and our sensory attunements off from all the other goings on, all the other lives, all of the other beings that are bodaciously going about their lives all around us in the land. And so it's become more and more difficult to mobilize people on behalf of another river that's being dammed up, or another wetland that's being filled in, another forest that is about to be clear cut, because well, okay, I read that that's happening and that's bad. So maybe let me click something on my keyboard to send a letter to some congressperson. But I don't feel what it's like for that wetland to be being filled in for another, shopping mall. I don't feel what it's like that river is about to be dammed up. It doesn't make me sick. It doesn't feel like I need to run out there and say, stop! That's my bloodstream you're damming up. This is my body. That's how we used to feel it. But now we're so obliviously caught up in relation with our own signs and our own screens. So our nervous systems are largely cocooned off from the more than human community of vital and vibrant life.
There are a few minutes left. I have a lot of questions and a few minutes. I'm going to go with one that it went around all our conversation that comes to do with words and with language. And you always talk as a cultural ecologist, but also as an ecology of the language. I don't know if that's a way of saying it, but in that words can be used to disenchant the world or reenchanted it. And I would like you please to talk about that, because it's a very useful tool, like language, to transform the world and our capacity of perception and all that.
Well, there's so much to be said. First, perhaps to say that we need to become adept at speaking less as disembodied minds and speaking more as full-bodied animals. And to do that, it simply takes paying attention, listening to the sound of our speaking, paying attention to the rhythm and the music of our words. So even when you and I are speaking here, we're not just, we may be paying attention to the dictionary meanings of our words, but these words also have rhythm. And as they ride on our tongue, they have a tonality, and there's even a melody to our speaking. Da-da-da-da-da-da. Speaking, yes, to our speaking, there's a rise and fall of the voices. Can we begin to pay attention to this soundful, songful layer of meaningful speech? Because this is what all the other animals hear of us when we're speaking. And of course, it carries a lot of the meaning. When I'm uptight and angry, your body is picking that up because my words are coming out in that form. That too is a full-bodied expression. Can we use words and phrases that are less abstract and that are more feelingful in their sound? And by us paying attention to the sound spell, what I like to call the sound spell of our speaking, or even tasting words on our tongue and finding words that taste good to us. And the words that taste good to me will be different from those that taste good to another person. But finding the ones that work so that when you're using them, you're speaking as this creaturely, bodily being that you are, and not just as a disembodied mind. But what I really want to say is that if we've gotten so cut off from these old animistic ways of experiencing the world, it has, I believe, everything to do, and this was a key part of my research and a central argument running through my first book, The Spell of the Sensuous, is that indigenous animistic cultures are by and large oral cultures, cultures that lived without a highly formal system of writing that was tied to their spoken language. What is it that reading and writing does to our senses and to our sensory experience of the land around us? And what is it that writing does to our experience of language and linguistic meaning. And I'll just say a tiny word about that because I know we're about out of time. But different.
Go ahead with the time that you need, please, because it's very interesting to listen to.
Well, the thing is, different writing systems affect our senses in very different ways, and more pictographic and even ideographic writing systems like that of China today, or the hieroglyphs of Egypt or of the Mayan culture, where you have written characters, but many of these letters or characters are stylized images of other animals, of monkey, of frog, or images of clouds and rain falling from those clouds, or of serpent or tree, or sunrise. And so a reader reading these ancient scripts is continually reminded of language's link to the whole more than human landscape of sunrise and moon and forest and serpent. So language still stays linked to the land, and everything still, in some sense, still speaks. Although writing begins to separate human language off from the world, these older, more pictorially derived writing systems link us still to a sense of the world as speaking. But with an alphabet, with a more purely phonetic writing system like the alphabet most of us use today, the letters no longer image anything in the surrounding world. They just point us back to our own face. And I see the letter B and I go buh. I see the letter C and I go ka. The letters begin to refer me back to myself. They function like mirrors reflecting the human form back upon itself. So you see, it's only when the alphabet first comes into a previously oral culture, usually carried by missionaries, teaching people the Bible and their ABCs so they can read the Bible. Only when the alphabet comes into an older oral culture does that culture begin to get this odd notion that language is an exclusively human property or possession, and the rest of the land begins to fall mute. It no longer seems to speak with 1,000 tongues and voices. We speak, and we think, that's what makes us humans so different from everything else. But I think this is a kind of madness, because everything speaks. And our languages, our human languages, were born not just between us speaking to other humans, but they were born in a deeply animistic context where we assumed that everything spoke. And so human languages arise in a kind of call and response to a speaking world, a world that speaks in so many different ways. And even when we, pay attention to our words in our modern languages, in English, the words I might use to describe the movement of water within the banks of a stream would be words like rush or gush, or the splash of those waters, the rush of waters. But the sound that unites all those words, rush, splash, gush, wash, is the sound that the water itself speaks as it moves between the banks, which is to say that our languages are fed and nourished by the voices of the land and not just by human voices. And we need to remember that and bring it back into our speaking and rejuvenate oral culture by telling stories again. Stories that we don't just read to our kids, but we take our kids outside and we improvise a story with our whole body about the crescent moon rising above the treetops, or just how the river maybe itself feels when the salmon are returning to its waters, and telling stories again with our whole bodies, not just reading, and certainly not just reading off of the screens of computers, but first storying with one another. Replenish oral culture. Rejuvenate the culture of face-to-face and face-to-place storytelling.
Beautiful, that face-to-face. Thank you so much, David, for your time, for your writings, for all your work. I hope you come to Argentina soon and we meet personally. And well, thank you for all this time you gave us.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this.
Thank you.